Spending package this big is sure to have waste. So is there at least, at the very least, a way to minimize that waste? California Republican Congressman Darrell Issa is doing what he can to tamp it down. He joins us now from Capitol Hill. Good to see you again, Congressman. Thanks for coming in.
Well, thanks for having me back. It seems like every time you've got me on, we're dealing in more billions. Pretty soon we'll be dealing in trillions on each of these.
Easy. Let's not go there quite yet, but let me just explain for the viewers that this report to the Congress by the USGAO, the Government Accountability Office, is something that has been in effect for a while now, I guess since about 1990. It's supposed to address spending bills of $1 billion or more, so I assume this package fits right in its purview.
Well, you would think it would, but unfortunately the speed with which these bills are being run through, the General Accountability Office has not begun to get staffed. They do now have the financial oversight under their, if you will, things we can task them for, but they still only have about 3,200 total investigators to deal with this $2+ trillion economy, not to mention an extra trillion here or there that get thrown in for these pork programs. So it is going to be years before we decipher it, by which time the money will be spent and or wasted.
Well, you were actually in there with the president today, with new President Obama. So what did you tell him, if you were able to address him personally, or what did your group try to tell him about this?
Well, I think the group had a myriad of things that in the first week we feel has been done wrong, up to and including the DTV conversion, delaying this decade-old project of switching from analog to digital. People are suggesting, for example, that if you don't have enough coupons to take care of a few poor people with rabbit ears, why not put that in the stimulus package? At least we know it gets spent between now and February or March or April, rather than this spending bill has some monies that undoubtedly will not be spent until President Obama's second term. And when you look at roads and highways, which is what everyone wants to talk about, it represents a few $billion. Corps of Engineer projects, $5 billion a year into $825 billion. And as you said earlier, those tax breaks in many cases go to people whose only claim to paying tax is for their own retirement, which they now will get back every cent they paid in toward what was supposed to be their retirement.
Well, here's the claim that the supporters of this are making, and frankly, I'm a little skeptical of it. They say that $1, theoretically, every dollar spent on infrastructure returns $1.59 in economic benefit. Now, I've seen a lot of public projects in my life, and frankly, most of them, you see people kind of hanging around. We had a subway that was being rebuilt in Manhattan in my neighborhood. It took about 5 years for a project that was supposed to take 1 year. We all remember the skating rink in Central Park that was supposed to have been done in 2 years. After 5 years, Donald Trump said, let me do it for half the cost. He got it done in 6 months. So are we really supposed to believe that public projects are better?
Well, clearly they're not. They could theoretically be faster, but in reality they're the slowest. A good example would be the visitor center here in the Capitol. Please come see it. It's beautiful. It cost $1 billion and took nine years to complete. And right now it's only sort of open. They're still working out the bugs on something where they broke ground roughly September 11th, 2001.
Well, and they're always over budget, too. I mean, that's the other thing about this subway. Every government project is over budget. So we're talking $825 billion in this spending plan. But if some of these projects, as they're likely to go over budget, we could be over $1 trillion.
Well, yeah, they'll be over budget and they'll be over the horizon. They'll be 3, 4, 5 years from now. Back in the 80s when the sometimes complained about investment tax credits under Reagan came out, there were two things you were sure of. One is it was buying things that were being produced into our economy, and two, you didn't spend, you didn't get the benefit. In the case of this $825 billion, basically the only thing we can be sure about is we're going to borrow $825 billion in order to finance that. That's $825 billion of somebody's investment that won't be available for loans to you and myself.
Well, Congressman, are we just going to have to wait for all this to come about until people kind of shake their heads and say, my God, Ronald Reagan was right. These things don't make sense. Or is there anything we can do about it now?
The only thing you can do is what you've been doing sequentially in each of these, is making the point that why is it we can only do these things in large numbers all at once and in a hurry. Whether it was former President Bush or now President Obama, it's very clear they've mastered the idea of there's a crisis, we need the money now, even if that money won't be spent for years. As you know, the second tranche of $350 billion is being spent right now, when in fact we were told we had to pass it in a matter of days or the market would shut down. The very markets that they never put a penny into really unfreezing.
Well, I'm glad you threw President Bush into that, because on some things I really admire President Bush. He did stand his ground on taxes. He stood his ground on the surge in Iraq. A lot of things that really turned out to be beneficial, I think, for the world. But on spending, he was always lousy, and particularly on spending on this TARP program. Are Republicans rethinking this? Of course, there's this battle now between some moderate Republicans and Rush Limbaugh on the issue of whether Republicans have lost their values. Frankly, I think Rush is right.
Well, you know, a Republican can't just be a Democrat light. We have to actually believe that the private sector is the place to do as much as we can, and the public sector is the place to do only what we have to. And that has to come back into the day-to-day speaking of Republicans, no matter where they are on the spectrum. And many of my moderate Republican friends in and out of office, I try to get them to understand that you can't be halfway when it comes to who you believe in, the public sector or the private sector, for solutions.
My wife likes you because she says you have backbone. You have a spine, and she finds too many people inside the Beltway who don't. Thank you very much for being here again, Darrell.
And thank your wife.
Okay, I will indeed. There is breaking news on mortgages today. Fox Business reporter Adam Shapiro is in Washington with some very important details. There's so much news out there, Adam. Most people overlook this, but it's critically important. Explain.
Well, let's keep it simple. If you're in trouble with your mortgage, there's a chance that the Federal Reserve is now coming to your aid. And essentially what they're doing is telling mortgage servicers who service mortgages which are owned or controlled by the Federal Reserve to modify the mortgages for people who would be eligible for loan modification. Now, you don't know if the Federal Reserve owns your mortgage or holds your mortgage. The banks that hold mortgages have been selling them or lending them to the Federal Reserve as collateral. Remember Bear Stearns? $29 billion worth of mortgages. The Federal Reserve owns those mortgages. So if you happen to be one of those mortgages, and if you're 60 days delinquent on your mortgage, you're going to get a call, you're going to get a letter, you're going to get some kind of communication from your mortgage servicer, and they're going to say, look, we think you might be eligible for modification.